As Congress pushes for another stimulus, does it have any chance of actually stimulating the economy? Plus, our one-on-one with former advisor to Donald Trump, terrorism expert, and retired Lieutenant Commander Steve Rogers today on the BizPo Show. Welcome to another week of the BizPo Show. I'm Seth Denson here in Dallas, Texas, where the lights are on. And I'm joined as always by Dan Geltrude, my good buddy in New York City. Dan, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, Seth. I'm glad to hear things are getting better in Texas. All of my Texas brothers and sisters have been in my prayers, so I'm glad the lights have gone on.
We certainly appreciate it, my friend. It's actually back to somewhat, I would say, life as normal in the aspect of, last week we saw temperatures in the upper 70s nearing 80 degrees, sunshine. Over the weekend we got quite a bit of rain, but nonetheless, it's back to Texas where we get all four seasons sometimes in one day. But, what can I say?
Texas is Texas.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Well, hey, buddy, I want to talk about stimulus this week because that certainly seems to be something Congress is focusing a lot of attention on, at least one side of Congress. So Democrats are pushing forward with a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Looks as though that's going to happen through budgetary reconciliation, as it's not going to happen through anything bipartisan. Your take, I know you've read a lot of what's been proposed. Is this going to do anything? Can we call it a stimulus anymore? Is it going to stimulate?
That's really the issue right there. You call it a stimulus package, and what that should mean to everyone is to stimulate the economy. And what that means to me is getting people back to work, creating jobs that were lost, and have people back to being able to sustain themselves, not relying on the government. Now, the government certainly has a role to help people out when you have situations like a national crisis, like the pandemic. No question about it, we need to help people out. However, I think we're missing the mark here. This is becoming an excuse to have wild spending. And what we really need to do is have targeted spending. So in my mind, Seth, a lot of this package should be geared towards getting vaccines into people's arms, because that is the answer, because that will allow us to open up this economy, get people back to work, and get the economy moving. That is stimulus.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that when I look at this, I think there's two things that I take into account. The first being is that right now, let's just forget COVID for a second if we can, and recognize that our federal government was already spending over $4 trillion a year while only collecting just a little over $3. Simple math tells me we've got a problem. So we're constantly going deeper and deeper into debt. We've now already spent over and above the $4 trillion where we only collect $3. So let's just say we're upside down $1. We've spent another $4 already. Now we're upside down $5. And we're looking to put another $1.9 trillion on top of that. Now that's $7 trillion. That's going to put our federal deficit more than 200% of our annual GDP as a nation by the year 2050. And again, as I start to think about this and we start to kind of break it all down, if you're going to spend that kind of money, it must be specifically targeted. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Dan, in that you said we're just kind of throwing money at all different kind of things. And don't get me wrong, I am for us investing a little bit more money in making sure we can help pull the economy out of this. But we need to focus that on really key areas like those that are unemployed, small businesses that are going under, targeted industries that are hurting as a result, and then fourth, getting the vaccine out there, getting that in people's arms. I'm okay spending money to get the vaccine out there so that we can reopen the economy. But what we're seeing instead is this litany of other things that are like, for example, the billions that we're going to spend on state and local government bailout. Specifically, these are going to go to states that were already reckless with their money. As a matter of fact, Governor Newsom in California now has passed his own stimulus package, giving away money to his citizens He doesn't have any money to give away. But he's doing it on the basis of knowing that the federal government's going to bail him out. And that's got to stop, because at the end of the day, what we're going to end up with is inflation. We're going to end up with a debt spiral that I don't know is recoverable.
I agree with you, Seth, and that's the point I want to make. I'm often asked the question, when is this national debt going to come back to haunt us? And nobody really knows. We're going to be hitting 30 trillion in a very short period of time. The reason that no one is doing anything about this is we have not been paying any consequences for our actions. And I believe, and I'll say, I don't know at what point we wake up and say, what happened? But that day will come at some point, and then, of course, we'll all be very sorry for this reckless spending. I think inflation is going to be an issue because the more we're printing money, the less value it has. And at some point in time, you just simply can't pay all your bills. And if that day comes, and it will, based upon how we're spending, it's not just the United States that's going to be in trouble. It's going to be the whole world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, listen, if we don't learn our lessons from the last few weeks where we're seeing companies like GameStop get shorted, I'm worried that the United States is going to get shorted. If we keep doing this, right, what's the value of the U.S. dollar going forward? I think this is why we're seeing so much energy around things like Bitcoin these days, because the rest of the world is looking at us and going, we're not responsible. And we're not. Those that we're electing to lead into leadership, both from the right and from the left, they're not responsible. They're not managing our assets. And as a result, our assets are going to decline in value while the dollar declines in value. And as you mentioned, inflation will go up. Nonetheless, this is a conversation I'm sure we're going to be talking about in weeks and months to come. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Washington is going to get their act together and stop the spending anytime soon. When we come back, we're really excited to have former Trump advisor Steve Rogers join us. We got a lot of questions to ask what we'll call Captain America Steve, and he'll be with us right after the break.
Welcome back to the BizPo Show. I am so honored to have none other than Steve Rogers, Captain America, here with us today. Steve is a former campaign advisor to President Donald Trump. He is a retired lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, Office of Naval Intelligence, and FBI National Joint Terrorism Task Force. This guy does it all. Steve, welcome to the BizPo Show.
Well, it is a pleasure to be on with America's Accountant, and I could tell you, if you were Secretary of Treasury, we wouldn't have the problems we're facing now, but it's an honor to be here.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Steve. So let me start off with this, Steve. First, let me say on behalf of Seth and I, thank you very much for your service to our nation.
Thank you.
So you were very involved with both of Donald Trump's presidential campaigns. And President Trump really believes that there was voter fraud in this last election. And that is what cost him the election. So, Steve, do you believe he's right that voter fraud is what actually cost him the election?
Well, Dan, I do. I do believe that there was voter fraud, but I also believe that there was not enough evidence to prove it. Now, we do have court cases still going on in different states regarding that subject of voter fraud, but the bar that one needs to reach in order to prove that it would have affected the entire election is very, very high. So instead of going down the road of voter fraud, which now the Supreme Court's thrown out some of these cases this past week, there are those that are going down the road of looking at who is handling these elections, maybe a misconduct in office, maybe some corruption going on. But all of this, saying all of this, the question is, what is the end game? And the end game now, I believe, is going to be election integrity. We have to make sure that our elections will no longer be compromised. They were. There's enough proof of that. But like I said, to reach the bar, the level that we wanted it to reach was pretty much a high mountain to climb.
I agree with you, Steve. I think that in every election there's a certain level of voter fraud. Now the question was it material enough to actually turn the results around? As you said, that's another matter. But voter fraud aside, what do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, President Trump could have done differently to have a different outcome in this past election? Is there something that you would look back now and changed, and you think that could have been the difference?
No, it's a great question. And boy, did he campaign hard. I mean, he was constantly campaigning. He went deep, deep into the grassroots and Main Street America. He bridged a wide gap that was there for so long between the Republican Party and our minority communities. And look at the fact is, and these are facts, it was the minority communities and pastors and others who came out and endorsed him. Businesses endorsed him. Law enforcement nationwide endorsed him. So it beggars the question, how does a guy that get all of these endorsements, has Main Street America standing shoulder to shoulder with him, has nearly 50,000 people at his rallies versus Joe Biden's 50 people, how does that guy lose? So nothing I would have changed at all. He was direct, he was forceful, and you know what was most important on the hearts of the American people? His America First agenda. America counted in his campaign.
Steve, the events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol, I think for everybody that watched, were disturbing. Nonetheless, the president, as a result, was impeached because of those events. I'm just curious, do you think he was responsible for anything that happened on January 6th?
Not at all. Let me begin by saying that what happened on January 6th was outrageous. It was an assault on our democracy, and those people should be put in prison. No question about it. There is absolutely no excuse for violence. But saying that, look, I looked at this from a law enforcement professional as well as a political analyst special, and I looked at this one point that people seem to forget. These rallies that have been surfacing as a result of the campaign are years and years of people being frustrated over politicians from both sides of the aisle promising so much to so many and delivering to so few. So this is years of pent up frustration. So people decided that they were going to now state that they had enough, and they went to Washington. Now, who went to Washington? The soccer moms, the coaches, the baseball, little league coaches, and on and on and on. But you know who else showed up? The same people who showed up at the Black Lives Matter marches and other marches around the country, both on the left and on the right, to do what? To hijack the message that the Main Street people were trying to send, and they caused violence. And as a result, this is what we end up with. President Donald Trump was not responsible at all for what happened. But collectively, I could tell you, the U.S. Congress is to blame in years and years of neglecting Main Street USA.
Steve, as someone who's close to the president, and of course, in many circles, he's still very popular, right? Republicans, by and large, still favor the president. Do you think he intends to run in 2024? Maybe that's part one to the question. Part two is, do you think he could get through a primary and then another general?
Well, for part one, will he run? I don't know. He certainly will be involved, and if he doesn't run, he will be, for lack of a better word, the kingmaker. He has the financial resources, he has the popularity, and he still has grassroots America. But if he runs, if he decides to run, let me just say what Mitt Romney, who's not a friend of President Trump, said just the other day, that if Donald Trump runs, even in a primary, Donald Trump wins by a landslide. So there's no question in my mind that he will be controlling the future of the Republican Party as we move forward.
You know, and along those lines, Steve, and what we're talking about with the Republican Party seems to be a bit fractured right now, and it seems like there are a group within the party that is still very loyal to Donald Trump, and there's a group that is trying to move as far away from Donald Trump as possible. So now the question I have for you is, where does the Republican Party go from here? Because if the Republican Party doesn't unify, there's no way they're going to be able to win national elections. So what do you advise the National Party to do?
Well, a few things. There's actually a third element to that, and that's the extremists, the extreme right. They have to be alienated and removed from the party. They serve no purpose but to cause a lot of this division, and they take over the conversation. They got to be removed. So Dan, what we'll do is we've got to work hard as a party with strong leadership of conservatives, by the way. You know, one of the problems that the Republican Party candidates have is that they give a good talk regarding conservative values and a conservative agenda. Then they compromise down the road thinking, and I've seen this in New Jersey quite often, thinking they're going to appease or neutralize the left or liberals. What they're doing is they're losing the base. So we need strong, courageous leaders who are going to stand up and stick to what they believe in. I'll use Ronald Reagan as a perfect example. You know, history is repeating itself. It really is. Reagan went through the same type of assault on him and his agenda as a conservative when he ran. But he stood tall, he stood strong, and so did Donald Trump. Now you see, after all this carnage, if you will, that has taken place, I'm talking politically, now you got Republicans calling Donald Trump and they're saying, look, can we sit down and have a talk? So he will be the leader and he will unite the party.
Steve, elections have consequences, and the big consequence, in my opinion, for the Republicans is what happened in Georgia. Now, the Republicans lost both of those Senate seats in the runoff in a state that's been traditionally deeply red. What went wrong there?
Well, I believe, unfortunately, again, I go back to the extremists, too many outside influences of voicing their views and opinions. And I've got to tell you, to be frank with you, they did a lot of damage. Look, we don't need people making wild statements, conspiracy theories. I'm not going to name the people, but they're serving no purpose but to help the America First agenda that President Trump wants to advance. So I think in Georgia, Dan, there was maybe a threefold fight going on there. One, you had the Democrats that were advancing a socialist agenda, no question about it. Then you had the Republicans that were establishment Republicans that didn't like the idea that Donald Trump was again going to be reelected. But then you had the outside element, which not too many people want to talk about at this point, but it's there. It's the Chinese Communist Party. There's no doubt in my mind. We have the evidence, all right, that they have in fact been at least tampering with some of our election integrity. So former Soviet Union, Russia, same thing. And that goes back to the Obama administration. So you got three fronts that Donald Trump had to face. And unfortunately, the Republican Party, you know what? They fell asleep a little bit down there. He didn't, but they did. But it goes back to leadership and unity.
Steve, you mentioned the far right earlier and maybe trying to squash those voices out of the party. In some ways, those folks seem to get to the microphone a lot, and even in some ways, they're making their way into Congress these days. But as a result, what we're finding, or it seems to find, and this is on the right and the left, this desire to not work together as a result of fear, perhaps, of those base on either side, of not allowing that person to then get out of a primary and get reelected. How do we return to a time where Congress could possibly come together and find things to work on in a bipartisan way and move the nation forward?
We, the people, Seth, have to take over the conversation. And I've said this all along that, in fact, again, I go back to Ronald Reagan. He said it all begins in your dining room. It begins in your living room. You have a discussion with your family and your neighbors, and you get involved locally. In fact, Lara Trump mentioned that just last week in a conversation that we were all having around this table. We've got to get involved locally, our school boards, our city councils, our mayor's offices, and on and on and on. So once we start to take over the conversation, we silence those running to the mic. Now, Seth, the reason why those who are running to the mic have been successful in taking the conversation is for ratings. And we've shared this with people. It's ratings. They don't want guys like you, Dan, or me on the air presenting an articulate, intelligent, as well as passionate voice. They want the wild ones out there. That brings ratings, but it's serving no purpose but to hurt our country. And people are waking up. And you know what the proof is? People are viewing your broadcast. They're viewing my broadcast. They're beginning to wake up and realize that from the broadcast that Dan Geltrude and Seth is on, and those of us who are out there trying to bring a solid, strong message of unity, they're resorting to us. That's why TV, as we know it, is going to be TV of the past. We're going to be the news now.
Steve, you bring up a great point. And matter of fact, just last week, right, we saw Congress coming together and holding hearings on perhaps shutting down some of those networks that I know that you appear on, that Dan appears on, that I appear on regularly to share our opinions. What's your take on that? I mean, is this the First Amendment perhaps under attack by Congress? Is this McCarthyism perhaps in a whole different light?
Great question, and I have the answer because we've been talking about this for quite some time. This is a direct assault on our government as we know it. It's a direct assault on all of our amendments, but in this case, the First Amendment. Who is directing the assault? There is no longer a Democrat, moderate, conservative party of JFK or FDR. There is now a Democrat party that has embraced the ideology of Stalin, of Marx, and of Lenin. And going back to the Reagan days, it started with what? Get into the unions. That's what the Chinese Communist Party's done. Get into the colleges. 300 American universities now have Confucius Institutes, brought to you by who? The Chinese Communist Party. So there is a strong effort on the Chinese Communist Party, back in Reagan's day it was the Soviet Communist Party, to do what? To begin to take control of our quality of life. It's all about the state. Assault on religion, assault on religious freedom, and now an assault on our First Amendment. They will be able, because of the financial impact that may occur with regard to these networks, they may be able to cancel some of these shows. But I know they're not going to cancel you guys, and they're not going to cancel us. So let them have their day. Their 15 minutes will be up. Things will turn around, so long as we the people now, stand strong.
Steve, shifting gears just a bit, you're a terrorism expert. Listen, this year we will mark the 20-year anniversary of September 11th on the attacks. We've been, as a nation, I think, very fortunate that we haven't seen another major U.S. Or major terrorism attack here on our soil. Nonetheless, are we as a country, in your opinion, are we safe? Have we just been lucky? And are we still safe today?
We're very safe. Compliments of President George Bush II and President Donald Trump. When I was a military intelligence officer, I was assigned to the FBI National Joint Terrorism Task Force when President Bush gave birth to a joint task force of intelligence agencies, your NSA, your CIA, your FBI. Now, why did he do that? That was called a fusion center where we would all share intelligence. He did that because, believe it or not, Dan or Seth, we never shared intelligence with each other. There was always the turf battles. Well, I'm the CIA, I'm not giving the FBI anything, and on and on and on. Well, when George Bush established that fusion center at FBI headquarters, all types of intelligence was exchanged, information was exchanged right down to the local cop. So that is where we began after 9/11. And that is why, one of two reasons why we have remained safe. Now we go along, President Trump gets elected. He presents not only strengthening what George Bush put together in that fusion center, but he presented a very strong America First agenda. He built our military. He did, in fact, build our intelligence agencies. You remember when you heard, well, the intelligence agencies are upset with President Trump? No. The politicians in that agency were upset. But the guys and gals on the ground, they weren't upset. So thank George Bush II and thank President Trump. There's the reason why we're safe.
Steve, for our last question to wrap things up along those lines of international affairs, Donald Trump took a very hard line with the international community, whether it was a friend or foe. And as you said, he made it very clear that it's America first. And he was criticized by a lot of people for that policy, including Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden is president, and he seems to be taking, as far as foreign policy goes, our nation in a much different direction. Are you concerned about that direction?
Well, I am. It's a policy of appeasement. It does not work. And let's use the most recent incident that's going on right now as you and I speak. John Kerry, he decided to go off when President Trump was in office to Iran and negotiate with our enemies regarding the nuclear deal. Now the fact is that this shows weakness. So Iran now, and this is fact, all right, this is not the speculation. Iran now is thinking about putting some standards that we, the United States government, has to meet to reopen the talks. And one of the things being explored is $1 trillion payment. Why not ask Joe Biden? He gave him a lot of money on in an airplane in the middle of the night on a runway. We all know that happened. So this has weakened the position of the United States, not strengthened us. And he also, Biden wants to take sanctions off that President Trump put on Iran. Look, we had Iran by the throat. I mean, they had nowhere to go. But now they're going to bully, they're going to intimidate, and Biden will probably fold. But things run in cycles, believe me. Like I said, they'll have their 15 minutes of fame. And if not, Donald Trump, a very strong America First conservative, is going to retake that office in 2024.
Well, Steve Rogers, Captain America, thank you so much for spending time with the BizPo show. We certainly want to have you back again very soon. So thanks, Steve.
Oh, thank you. And to you and Seth, thanks so much for what you're doing. The news and information is factual that you're giving to the American people, and you deserve an applause for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And we'll be right back with our final thoughts.
Welcome back to the BizPo Show. If you're a regular viewer of the show, you know that every week Dan and I like to give you our final thoughts. So for this week, Dan, my final thought is that, I'm reminiscing of an old joke that the trouble with free speech is that so few people support it. But no, that's wrong. Everyone in America supports free speech, so long as it's theirs, or at least the people that they agree with. Last year, the New York Times, once hailed as an establishment of journalism, published an op-ed from a staff writer who argued that we must rethink the First Amendment to allow the federal government to police hate speech. That attitude, while perhaps well-intentioned, has helped lead the mainstream media and liberal parties down a dangerous path of silencing those they don't agree with. For who determines hate speech? Don't get me wrong, there's hate speech, but who is the judge and jury of that? We've seen caretakers of the English language influenced by party politics, such as Merriam-Webster Dictionary changes the meanings of words to try to embarrass people like Amy Coney Barrett during her confirmation hearings, or to allow more ambivalence to the law, such as the Biden administration wanting to change illegal alien to non-citizen. This sterilization of language is gentle, yes, but no less lethal to free speech. This trend has continued on, and now there are calls to cancel entire media organizations. Newsmax, Fox News, One America News. Well, they're not looking to silence them, but deplatform them. Allow them no place to exercise their right of free speech without silencing them. Well, it's the same thing, and arguing that it isn't, that's just semantics. Last week, House Democrats called for these private industries, to be removed, and that the industries that control cable news and cable networks, that they remove these media companies that they didn't like. That's what your politicians are working on in Congress, folks. Still haven't gotten that emergency COVID aid out, still haven't significantly ramped up production of current vaccines, but they really want to make sure that you aren't exposed to a thought that they don't approve of and that they can't control. These same House Democrats who receive lobbying money from news organizations such as NBC, CBS, Google, and Yahoo, who, wouldn't you know it, they're the direct competitors of Newsmax, Fox News, and One American News. So there's your actual priority. Voltaire was thought to have said, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." Well, there you are. The Fourth Estate and Democrats have deemed that you are not allowed to question them, their motives, their data, or their methods. Do I agree with everything that these networks or their guests say? Of course not. But I appreciate their coverage of stories that CNN won't touch. How can one form their own opinion or conduct their own research via conversation if they are denied a topic? Communist China and other countries like that control the narrative in their countries by silencing their critics. Is that what we want here? The defense of free speech begins at the point where people say something you can't stand. if you can't defend their right to say it, then you don't believe in free speech after all. And that's my final thought.
Seth, my final thought relates to veterans. I see someone like Steve Rogers who really loves America, and he doesn't just talk about it. He walked the walk. He put on the military uniform of this great nation, and he put his life on the line. And there are so many like Steve Rogers who, to your final thought, went out and defended the First Amendment, put their life on the line, only to have people criticizing them. Now, if that's not love for country, I don't know what is. And as the older I get, I really have come to appreciate what veterans have done for us and the challenges that veterans face when they come back to civilian life. I think about my mother's brother, my Uncle John, who served in Vietnam. And let's face it, it was an unpopular war, but there was really no pride in having served. When those soldiers came back, they weren't appreciated. People weren't thanking them for their service. As a matter of fact, people were really angry with them that they didn't resist and refuse to serve. But they served anyway because love of country mattered that much. And as we see what veterans go through, not just in how difficult it is defending our country, but when they come back in that transition to civilian life, yes, we should thank our veterans. And yes, I'm sure they'd appreciate a hug with a mask on. But to the extent those that can employ a veteran and help them out, that's probably one of the greatest gifts that we can give our veterans. We do want to help them, and the government should help them. But I don't believe that veterans are looking for handouts, not after what they've sacrificed for all of us. And that's my final thought.
Couldn't agree more, buddy. Couldn't agree more. Well, that does it for this week's edition of the BizPo Show. We hope you'll tune in next week as we welcome guest Dr. Robert Rankins, Chief of Emergency Medicine, who will give us an update on what's going on in the fight against COVID, new vaccines that are coming out. It's certainly something you won't want to miss. We hope you'll tell your friends about us, and we look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week. From Dallas, Texas, I'm Seth Denson.
And from New York City, I'm Dan Geltrude. Good night.